Hey, welcome back once again, Hidden Acres Homestead NC. I'm David. The wife Carrie Beth is not back from work yet, but what we're going to talk about today and show you is some basic maintenance that you need to do on your bush hog. This is bush hogging season. We're approaching mid-September here in central North Carolina, and deer season's quickly approaching. I got game trails I got to get cut that should have been done probably in August, but we got a start on it the other day, and I was checking the gearbox oil on the bush hog. It's milky. It's had water in it. We're going to drain that out, and then we're going to put some fresh 85 weight 140 oil in it, which is what the manufacturer Rhino calls for. So we're going to go through that. I'll show you a couple of things to be sure to do on your bush hog before you start doing a lot of serious work with it, because if you don't maintain those things, and they ain't cheap to buy, you're going to have a bunch of crap. Hey, there she comes, pulling up the driveway now. But one other thing I want to tell you about before we jump over to the bush hog stuff, we're changing the name of the channel to Hidden Acres Outdoors. Mainly because we're going to start covering, we're still going to cover the bees and the chickens and the equipment reviews and all the homestead stuff and everything else, but it's hunting season, folks, and I like to hunt, and I love to fish too, and I'm a fly fisherman. We're going to talk about hunting. We're going to do some gun reviews. It's not going to be all this fancy crap. I won't say crap because I've never met a gun I didn't like, but we're going to cover a lot of that stuff that you use in a homestead environment for harvesting game. We'll go over some fly fishing stuff. I love to fly fish, not for trout. I'm a big mouth bass and coastal fly fisherman. So we'll get into some of that stuff in some of the videos down the road. But that's why you're going to see the name change. And you'll get the swing of it. You'll get the hang of it. It should be nothing different for the subscribers. But right now, I've run my mouth long enough. Let's get on to working on this bush hog. Make sure you don't have any baling wire or twine or plastic or anything else wrapped around your output shaft that's up here under the bush hog. I did a video on that. I'll link to it. But just inspect that. Make sure you don't have any junk up under where your cutting blades are working, because if you do, you're going to ruin that seal in there. Your oil's going to leak out, and then you're going to ruin this gearbox. But make sure that your bolts that hold this gearbox in place are torqued down to the specifications. I've already done the rest of them, and we're going to torque this last one down, and of course you're going to need a torque wrench for this. But make sure that your bolts holding the gearbox on are all torqued down correctly, because if they're not, and this thing starts vibrating and wallowing out these holes in the deck, you're going to have a mess that's going to be pretty daggone expensive to fix. We've already slipped the clutch on this thing. So we did that a little earlier in the season, so we feel pretty good about that. And it actually slipped a couple of times on me yesterday evening, a little bit dark, and I actually hit some stuff I shouldn't have because I didn't see it. Next, we're gonna grease up. There are grease zerks on your sleeves here. Don't forget about them. Grease these up. There's one on the front. There's going to be one back here on the earth. Well, I guess this is the front and that's the back. Grease those, and I'm going to pull this off, and we're going to grease up universal joints. You don't need to see me do that. I'm going to lower this thing down. We'll make sure our breather cap can actually breathe, and I'll show you what this oil looks like. If you get water in your gearbox oil, and what I normally do, since I store my stuff outside, is just put a 5-gallon bucket or something over this. But evidently it blew off. And see that? You don't want to be running your bush hog with that crap doing your lubricating, because that's not good. So we're going to pump all that out. One of my biggest gripes about today's gearbox manufacturers. Even though this has a 5-year warranty on this gearbox, there's not a drain plug down in the bottom where you can get all this crap drained out. So you're going to have to go down to the hardware store or somewhere and buy you a little pump and get all that heavyweight grease out of there, and then refill it with some good stuff. But we're going to lube all this up, change the oil out in this. One thing you've got to make sure of, I've already lost one of these bolts off the rear. A lot of vibration on a bush hog and a lot of wear and tear back here. I mean, these rear tires on a bush hog, whether you got a single or a double, I mean, they are abused. So you can see you've got a grease zerk here on the hub, the axle. You've also got one here for the spline that allows this thing to rotate, and they do. You got to keep these things lubed up, folks. I'm just here to tell you, because if you don't, these suckers here, especially these laminated ones, are freaking expensive to replace, and you don't want to go down there for want of a little bit of grease. So we're going to do that. I would show you the blades, but I'm almost embarrassed by them right now. I'll show them to you anyway. I have used and abused these things trying to learn the land, and they are pretty dinged up. Well, that's not a good angle. Pretty dinged up in some spots, so I can probably get through this fall season with them, but I'm going to end up having to replace these blades, I'm quite certain. And I mean, they got some chunks. I have run into some rather large rocks, and good thing we got that slip clutch on there, or else all that, if you don't slip this thing, all that sudden stoppage would have transferred up through this gearbox, down the PTO shaft, into the PTO shaft on my tractor, and wherever the weak link is where this thing would have broken. And hopefully it would have been in one of these universal joints and not my expensive gearbox or my more expensive tractor. But you know, don't roll the dice on that. Okay, let's get that done, and then we'll get to doing some bush hog work. This is the junk that came out, and at the beginning of the year I did replace this oil. It's 85 weight 140. I've changed it out all new. Now the black stuff in there, those are just coffee grounds floating in there from the container I siphoned the oil into, so don't worry about that. But now we're going to go ahead and service, and I just got this from Tractor Supply, 85-140. It meets the specs, so this is what we're going to put in. If you see the color of that as it's going in, that's what this stuff should look like. Now I have no doubt that I'm still going to have some issues. There's no telling how many times I would have to drain and flush this thing to get most of this water out, but every little bit helps. So that's what we're doing. Then we're going to lube up these two universal joints, the tail wheel, and we're going to get to work here on the some more bush hogging. I got some game trails to cut. Deer season's almost here, and I'm running behind. Now I'm going to show you a little trick I learned in the Girl Scouts. You see how this old grease up here is discolored and everything else, and this is what came pumping out? When you're lubing up stuff like this, now as an example right here, I had new grease coming out, which means, or not new, but it's not bad looking grease coming out of there. But down here in the actual hub on the tail wheel on this thing, I've got a little bit of squirt coming out here from the zerk, but then we got all this that came squirting out. So you want this stuff out and you want the good stuff in. So you just don't give it 2 or 3 licks with a grease gun and call it good to go. You want that old crap out of there, and you want fresh grease in your tail wheel here. But anyway, when you pump new grease in, you can see this old grease coming out right up here where my finger is. It just oozes out. So I'm going to keep pumping until I get good grease coming out of there. Then I know I got fresh stuff packed in on my wheel bearing there on the tail wheel. Okay, if I can get this in the frame here. It's also very important when you're greasing up your Zerks, make sure you get them cleaned off. There's a little pin here with a little ball bearing and spring type arrangement behind it. If this is covered in gunk, like you can see the rest of this universal joint is, bush hogging's a messy business. And if that gets covered up, you can clog up a grease Zerk in the drop of a hat, and you don't want to do that. So make sure you get a rag in here and clean this off to where this is opened up, and you can actually get in there and get some grease into it, number one, but don't pump a bunch of crap in there as you do it. I think we're about done with the maintenance part of this. This is not something you have to do every time before you go out, because it's not every time you're going to drain and refill your main gearbox there with oil, but something that you really ought to do every time. I think the manual calls every 8 hours you grease up these universal joints, front and rear, and I think every 40 or 50 hours it calls for torquing down or checking the torque on all your bolts. So we did all that today. We had a loose bolt back here we had to fix. I got a little more torque on a couple of the nuts up here holding the main gearbox in place. So we've cleaned that up. We made sure there's nothing trapped up underneath. And I need to come in here and lube up my Pat's hitches, don't I? If you don't have a set of these things, you are missing out, hero. Instead of that big conglomeration that you get, it's a 3-point adapter and everything else, that works great if all your implements are exactly the same width and dimensions. Mine are not. So these Pat's quick hitches are the cat's meow, I'm here to tell you. So let's get busy bush hogging. That's going to be it from the new name, remember, Hidden Acres Outdoors. And give us a like, give us a subscribe. And if you've got a better way of doing some of this, or another routine you go through when you're prepping your bush hog stuff for work, have at it. Type it out in the comments down below and teach all of us a thing or two. Other than that, we'll see you. I got work to do. Bye.